In today's video, I will be showing you how to make your own drift car. Let's get started. Alright, so first thing you want to do is kind of get a general idea of what kind of drift car you want. For beginners, I recommend Japanese sports cars. They're the easiest to mod and they're the easiest to control. We'll pick the Club K's Sylvia because I think it's probably one of the best drift cars. So we'll let the game load the designs here. Just kidding, we're just going to paint it our own color. There's the stock colors. I'm going to paint it a yellow because I think that's a good, easy color for this. Definitely not that color. Okay, not bad, not bad. Alright, so I put the tune that I use for drifting just so I can show you the parts that I personally use for this drift car. So for engines, I recommend the 3.2 inline 6, or if you don't want to do that, you can always pick the 6.2 V8. Both options are good. I just don't recommend any other engines, especially for beginners. These two engines are probably the best to go with. So, and here's the engines. So the 6.2 is also a decent engine, I just don't recommend it. Just don't get the Turbo Rally, that's a terrible engine. The other two are like meh, but for starters I always, or for like beginners, don't get those high horsepower engines. Just remember to always keep the car rear-wheel drive, especially if you're a beginner. All-wheel drive can be easy to drift if you know how to do it, but if you don't do it. Alright, for turbos, personally I always recommend the single turbo or the Pro Charger. Those are the easiest to drift with. Twin turbo can be really squirrely for a lot of people, and the center charger or center supercharger, you know, that's okay, but for beginners, single turbo, Pro Charger are the best to go with. Alright, on to cosmetics. For cosmetics, you can do whatever you want, you can do whatever bumpers. I personally like the kit that I have for this car, but you can do whatever. Just be aware that winds, depending on the car, can affect how it drifts. And the thing is it really depends on the car. Some cars can drift with massive winds, some cars can drift with tiny winds. So it really depends on the car. For drift tires, make sure you always have actual drift tires. You can drift with street or sport tires, but it's different. You'll have a little more and different grip style than you will with the drift tires. So that's up to personal preference. Keep the front wheels skinny, but that's just how most people in this game drift. I prefer it too. Back wheels, get as big and thick as you physically can. It will definitely help your drifting. For rims, you can do whatever rims you want. Personally, I like these ones. I kind of like the 5 and 6 spoke, really thick wheels. Just, you know, personal preference. For engine spacers, best thing you can do is widen that sucker up. You can keep it stock, but if you want to keep the angle for longer, always widen both of them. And you can kind of see they kind of, I don't know if you can kind of see it in the camera, but they do stick out just a little bit. Like I'd say just probably an inch or two from the actual part of the fender of the vehicle. So, but it's all up to you, but this is just how I do it. Alright, onto drivetrain. Oh, there goes Forza. So, clutch, always want race. It's the best thing you can do the others, but race will give you the best outcome. For transmission, I always recommend that race. It's usually a 6-speed, some cars it's a 5-speed. Sometimes it's a 7-speed, depends on the car, but for this one it is a 6-speed and it's really good. Requires very little tuning, so that's why I kind of recommend it. For driveline, go with race. Trust me, it'll help you. And then for differential, go with drift. You can do it with race, but drift is kind of its intended purpose. But it does work. For brakes, always race brakes. I don't know why you would do anything else. Race brake all the way. For drift suspension, as you can see, mine is raised for my tune, but it will be lowered for most everybody, and it will drift both at least for this car, it drifts the same both ways. I prefer it raised just to kind of get that Formula drift look, but you can do lower, and it kind of looks like that, like the race suspension, just a little bit lower. But yeah, preferably I kind of like it raised just to get that like Formula D, Formula drift kind of look to it. But all up to you at the end of the day. For these, definitely want race. Don't know why you would get anything else. It helps your car kind of do its thing. Roll cage, trust me, you guys want the roll cage. It helps your car drift. It keeps the car stiff and sturdy, which for drifting you want. It keeps it one piece. Doesn't make it sloshy, if that makes sense. Roll cage, or the roll cage, weight reduction, full rate reduction. But remember, this is all just personal preference. You can do whatever you want. Alright, for engine, this is where it gets interesting. Every car is slightly different, so just remember that when tuning your vehicle. So personally, if Forza wants to load here, there it goes. So I only do a couple things, and I try to keep it under 650 horsepower. That's just my thing. So you can see here I'm showing you how most of it, I don't have most of the stuff. I prefer stock on the 6.2, or 6.2. On the 3.1 or the 3.2 engine. I just get like the stock engine. So here we go. I have the race set up, and I don't know if you guys can see the bottom. It really changes the horsepower. For the valves, I do race, but that's all personal preference. It just gives you just that little bit, a good extra horsepower. There you go, race again. You can, if you want to try to keep it just a little bit more like easy to drift. Like this is really for beginners, but kind of the horsepower I'm running about 630s is a good thing. Pistons, I have race, but you can do it with sport. For turbo, like I said, do the best turbo you can, either single or pro. Best drift style. For single, you definitely have to go all the way up. For pro, you can do sport or race. It really just depends on how you like to drift. But for single turbo, I prefer just the biggest you can get. Intercooler and all that down here, you don't really have to do. Just don't get the flywheel, because with some cars in Forza, it really messes with your top speed. And I mean like by like 20 or 30 miles. So, but that's kind of it. So that's all the upgrades. So let's get to tuning here. Alright, so for tire pressure, I prefer 30, but I know most drifters, like my friend, run it at about 15 pounds. I prefer 30, so you can test either one. But that's just all. That's the thing. This is all personal preference. So here's the tune for this. It's not much different from the stock. Just a little more on the speed, a little more acceleration in first gear. Second gear, just a little bit more. The other gears you don't really have to mess with because they're pretty good, but that's the thing, is it's just a trial and error for drifting. You just have to go back and forth and see which works best for your car. So for camber, I always prefer negative 1.5 in the back. That is the best you can go. You can go above, but I think personally it just is a little too slidey, and anything less than negative 0.1, 1.0, is just a little too little. So kind of like negative 1.0 to negative 1.5. For toe, I prefer just a little bit in the back, just to kind of give it a little bit of camber. Caster, you want that sucker all the way over. You want as much angle as humanly possible to get this car sideways, just like how Formula Drift works. For everything else, you don't really have to touch. For ride height, you can do it raised up, you can do it down. It just depends on your style. If you do have it raised up, it's easier to do jump drifts because your car doesn't bottom out. But that's kind of the rough idea. Oh, I leveled up. Oh. Well, I guess thank you, game. And now that all the tuning is ready, let's start sliding this thing around. I do recommend finding like a nice open place like this where you can kind of whip side to side, see how it feels. This is my tune, and I prefer kind of the really slow, casual drifting instead of the fast, like 100+ miles an hour. But this is like the easiest way to drift, just so you can get a rough idea to kind of see how it feels. If you need to, always go back and forth. So tune a little bit, drift a little bit, drift, tune a little bit, drift. Kind of go back and forth, kind of see how it feels little by little, and eventually you'll find a really good spot, save that tune, and you are good to go, my friend.